The desert had a way of swallowing sound, even the kind carried by the wind. At night, the Libyan sands glowed silver under a swollen moon, stretching out in every direction like an endless, shimmering ocean. In the distance, a fortress sat carved into a rocky ridge, a brutalist block of concrete and limestone installed decades earlier under orders from Muammar Gaddafi himself. Its jagged silhouette rose like the spine of a dead leviathan, a reminder that the Libyan regime always preferred intimidation over architecture. And somewhere inside that fortress, hidden behind layers of guards, traps, coded passages, and the paranoia of a dictator, was a man Mossad had been hunting for nearly 4 years. His name, at least the one Mossad used, was Barakat al-Saf. Arms broker. Shadow financier. The man responsible for threading together Gaddafi's most dangerous clandestine deals. But the worst of his work wasn't the weapons he bought for Libya, it was the buyers he sourced for Gaddafi's personal stash, the kind of hardware the dictator wanted hidden off the books, untraceable to the regime, ready for a day when the desert winds would turn and the world would forget its treaties. One of those off-book buyers was scheduled to enter Libya under clandestine protection, and Mossad had reason to believe this particular buyer was negotiating the acquisition of guidance systems that could turn Libya's aging stockpile into precision weapons. If you enjoy these dark, classified operation stories, hit the like button. There's more hidden history than most people ever hear about. The story began not in Libya but in a nondescript room inside Mossad's Sigint wing in Tel Aviv. A young analyst named Erez Ben David noticed a spike in encrypted bursts routed through a Lebanese exchange. At first glance, nothing unusual. The region breathed encrypted bursts. But these weren't the usual Hezbollah or Iranian flows. These were tagged in old code sequences Mossad hadn't seen in years, patterns linked to a defunct procurement network once run by Gaddafi's intelligence directorate. When Erez cross-referenced them with maritime AIS anomalies, a picture began to form. A shipment of electronic components shielded by commercial invoices had been routed to a ghost warehouse in Tunisia. Then 6 days later the buyer appeared, one Mossad had marked as a phantom. A ghost in their files. A negotiator who knew how to vanish between borders. Mossad believed he was a key part of a rebuilding network intent on supplying rogue states with classified Western military tech. But no one ever caught him, no one ever photographed him, and until recently no one could prove he existed. Until now. Mossad's director of operations, Dan Regev, convened an emergency briefing in a silent underground room beneath the headquarters. What the analysts unveiled triggered an immediate green light for one of the most audacious infiltration missions Mossad had ever attempted. They would have to insert a covert team into Libyan territory, no allies, no safe houses, no local cooperation. Straight into a fortress built for secrecy, designed for paranoia, and protected by men whose loyalty was not measured in money but in fear. Regev spoke with the calm weight of someone who had carried too many missions on his shoulders. The buyer, he said, would arrive for a face-to-face meeting with Barakat inside the fortress. The meeting was rumored to finalize the acquisition of guidance systems stolen from a European defense contractor. If delivered to Libya, these systems could give Gaddafi's inner circle an untraceable missile capability with precision accuracy across hundreds of kilometers. It wasn't just an Israeli red line, it was a regional red line, one that Mossad and its allies would never allow to be crossed. The infiltration team chosen was coded as Unit Zohar 7, an off-book tactical intelligence squad used for the kind of assignments that required both surgical precision and absolute deniability. Leading the operation was Yael Arman, a veteran field officer with a reputation for exploiting the cracks in human psychology, a woman known inside Mossad as the Shadow Negotiator. Alongside her were two specialists, Doran Halavai, an infiltration expert whose calm expression never revealed how many high-risk entries he had survived, and Nadir Koren, a covert tech operative capable of making a fortress's cameras see ghosts instead of intruders. For days, Zohar 7 studied the fortress. Its blueprints didn't exist. Its construction records were classified. Mossad had to piece together its architecture from outdated satellite images, drone scans, and witness interviews from former Libyan engineers who had once touched the project in its early stages. What they learned was unsettling. The fortress wasn't meant to keep invaders out, it was meant to keep secrets in. There were blind corners in every hallway, dead zones between floors, hidden interior shafts, and a communication room buried deep within the rock, sealed by thick reinforced metal designed to withstand direct assault. And that was where Barakat and the buyer would meet. Getting inside was the easy part, Yael said during their briefing. Getting out before the fortress swallowed them alive. That was the question. Their approach into Libya had to be silent. They couldn't fly in. They couldn't sail in. They couldn't drive across the border. All traditional routes were monitored by Gaddafi's mukhabarat. The solution was something only Mossad would dare attempt. Zohar 7 would enter through the desert from the west, disguised as a medical volunteer convoy heading toward a village hit by a sandstorm. Their vehicle would be a modified aid truck, humble, dusty, harmless. But beneath the crates and water tanks were false compartments holding their infiltration suits, microdrones, breaching tools, and an encrypted uplink disguised as a field radio. They crossed into Libya without being stopped once. The desert was unforgiving, a constant reminder that between the dunes and the fortress stretched nothing but silence and heat. But the silence served their mission. The mukhabarat patrolled the coast and borders aggressively, but the western interior was a graveyard of old Soviet wreckage and abandoned towns. No one cared what passed across those sands. Night fell like a curtain when they reached the final rise overlooking the fortress. Through binoculars, Yael studied the structure. Guards moved along the walls with strict discipline. Floodlights swept the compound. A single convoy, likely carrying the buyer, approached from the northeast. This was it. The mission depended on entering the fortress without triggering suspicion, alarms, or confrontation. Mossad knew the guards weren't just soldiers. They were loyalists conditioned to protect secrets with their lives. Any mistake would turn the entire fortress into a trap. Yael checked her watch. Doran and Nadir loaded their gear. Below them, the fortress breathed with the slow rhythm of a sleeping beast. Yet inside its walls, a meeting was about to begin that could reshape the future of the region if Mossad didn't intervene. And with that, Zohar 7 disappeared into the darkness, ready to slip into a world of stone, paranoia, and shadows, where one wrong footstep could end not only the mission, but their lives. The descent toward the fortress felt like moving through the ribs of some colossal buried creature, the sand crunching beneath their boots, the cold desert air cutting across their faces. Yael signaled for silence, not because anyone could hear them at that distance but because silence sharpened the senses. Doran moved slightly ahead, scanning the terrain, his silhouette merging with the rocky ground. Nadir carried a small case slung across his chest, its interior filled with the tools that would allow them to turn the fortress's own surveillance against itself. They stopped behind a collapsed stone structure, an old colonial ruin swallowed by the sands. From here, the fortress loomed just 100 meters away, a slab of concrete carved with narrow windows that looked less like openings and more like scars. Floodlights circled the perimeter at measured intervals. A pair of guards stood at the main entrance, their rifles slung casually but their eyes alert, trained by years of serving a regime that trusted no one, not even its own. Nadir crouched and unfolded a compact drone no larger than a bird. Its matte black surface absorbed the moonlight. He tapped a sequence into his wrist console and the drone hummed softly before lifting into the air, vanishing instantly into the night. Yael watched its telemetry appear on her screen. The fortress cameras were older than Mossad expected. Analog feeds patched into digital monitors, but lacking any real encryption. That made them easier to manipulate, but it also meant the output was unpredictable. Analog had a way of glitching at the wrong moment. If you enjoy these intense covert operations, hit the like button. It helps more people discover the hidden stories buried beneath world events. The drone slipped behind a floodlight tower and attached itself magnetically to the steel frame. From there, it tapped into the camera cable. Nadir's fingers worked quickly, injecting a loop feed of an empty hallway into the fortress's internal system. Once the loop played, the guards monitoring the screens would see nothing but stillness. The fortress walls would become blind. Now came the hard part. Mossad had discovered a maintenance hatch on the fortress's west side, a narrow sliver carved into the stone, likely meant for emergency ventilation repairs. It was scarcely wide enough for one person to squeeze through. According to their intel, the hatch led into a sloped passage behind the fortress kitchens, an area rarely patrolled. But the intel was uncertain. No satellite image could predict if the hatch had since been sealed, trapped, or mined. Doran approached first. His gloved fingers brushed away sand from the hatch's edge, revealing a square iron plate. He pressed an ear against it. No hum. No power signal. He pulled out a thermal cutter, a tool disguised as a cracked flashlight. A thin, near-invisible blade of heat traced along the panel's perimeter. The metal softened silently without sparks. After a few seconds, Doran gripped the edge and pulled. The hatch groaned as it came loose. A breath of stale, cold air escaped from inside, a scent like old stone and forgotten corridors. Yael slipped inside first. The narrow passage pressed against her shoulders as she crouched and moved forward, her flashlight off, her hand brushing the wall to guide her steps. Doran followed, dragging a small pack, with Nadir sealing the hatch behind them using a magnetic clasp designed to mimic the original weld. Inside, darkness swallowed everything. The passage sloped downward, the air growing colder with each step. After several meters, Yael felt the space widen. She flicked on a dim red light. They stood at the mouth of a service tunnel lined with rusted pipes and dust-choked vents. The low hum of generators echoed from somewhere deeper in the fortress, and the occasional clatter of metal hinted at distant movement. Maybe guards, maybe workers, maybe no one at all. Their map was incomplete, pieced together from fragments of intelligence and a few whispered testimonies. But according to what they had, the tunnel would curve around beneath the kitchens and lead to a staircase used by staff during supply rotations. That staircase would take them 2 levels up, where the meeting was scheduled to take place. Yael checked her watch. The buyer had arrived 15 minutes earlier. The meeting would begin soon. They moved silently through the tunnel. Nadir paused now and then, checking for wire traps or pressure sensors. Gaddafi's intelligence services had a reputation for layering paranoia into their security. Redundant alarms, fake vents, dead-end staircases that led to panic rooms. But so far the path remained clear. When they reached the end of the tunnel, Yael peeked through the grate. A row of stainless steel countertops filled the kitchen beyond, all dimly lit by a single overhead light. No staff. No guards. Perfect. Doran loosened the screws, lifted the grate, and helped the team climb through. They moved swiftly between the counters, keeping low until they reached a door leading to the service staircase. Yael pressed her ear against the metal. Silence. She eased the door open. The staircase spiraled upward, lit by flickering yellow bulbs. At the first landing they froze, voices echoed above them. 2 men speaking in Arabic. Guards. Yael signaled her team to move to the wall, flattening themselves against the concrete. The guards descended slowly, their boots tapping rhythmically on the metal steps. At 5 meters, Yael nodded. Doran moved behind her with calculated precision. When the guards reached their level, Yael stepped out in a silent blur, jamming a sedation needle into the first guard's neck while Doran clamped a hand over the second guard's mouth and pressed him into the wall. The needles worked instantly. Both guards crumpled soundlessly. Yael dragged the bodies behind a maintenance cabinet and motioned upward. They reached the top of the staircase, now level 2 of the fortress. According to intelligence, the meeting room was just down the hall and around a corner. A command center sat nearby with guards and technicians. If they were spotted, the entire fortress would lock down within seconds. Nadir deployed another microdrone, this one designed for interior mapping. It flew low, hugging the ceiling, projecting a real-time wireframe of the hallway on Yael's screen. 4 guards stood outside the meeting room. 3 more sat inside the command post. Too many to confront. Too many variables. Yael pressed her back against the wall, thinking. The buyer would be seated inside with Barricade already. Mossad didn't want to kill the buyer. They needed him alive, interrogated, exposed. Killing him would only create a martyr for whatever network he secretly served. Yael whispered into her mic, Nadir, can you ghost the command room for 60 seconds? Nadir hesitated. I can blind them but not silence them. If they try to use the radio. They won't, Yael said. Because they wouldn't have time. She signaled her team. They prepared flash suppression goggles and thin breaching charges no larger than a coin. This was it. The next 60 seconds would determine whether the mission succeeded, or whether Mossad would vanish into a Libyan grave, unclaimed and unmentioned. Yael placed her hand on the charge, ready to trigger. Then from behind the door of the meeting room they heard a voice. Come. Crisp. Confident. The buyer had begun speaking. And Yael recognized the voice instantly. The buyer wasn't a phantom. He was someone Mossad thought was dead. Yael's heart slammed in her chest as everything she thought she knew about the mission shifted in a single heartbeat. The convoy moved through the Libyan desert like a shadow skimming the earth. 3 dusty pickup trucks rattling toward the coast and a boxy, unremarkable van hiding Israel's most unconventional infiltration team. Inside the van, dim red lights glowed over the gear. Forged Libyan military permits, uniforms stitched to perfection, and a crate of dismantled surveillance devices disguised as medical equipment. But the team's real weapon was information. Weeks of intercepted chatter pointing to a buyer Muammar Gaddafi trusted with one job. Acquiring restricted European missile guidance components. A man known only as the Falcon. And tonight the Falcon was inside the fortress. The structure wasn't officially on any map. It sat carved into a limestone cliff overlooking the Gulf of Sidra, wrapped in minefields, watchtowers, and a rotating garrison of soldiers whose loyalty belonged not to Libya, but to Gaddafi personally. Commander Eyal, the mission lead, studied the distant lights through binoculars. "That's no fortress," he murmured. "That's a trap designed to swallow an army." But Mossad wasn't sending an army. They were sending 6 people. The plan was insane. Infiltrate the fortress by posing as a medical inspection team called in to investigate a suspected cholera case among the guards. The story had been seeded days earlier through forged radio logs. They had one chance, one window, one lie that had to break clean. At the checkpoint, 2 guards stepped out, rifles slung lazily but eyes alert. "Papers," one barked. Eyal handed over the forged orders. A long silence followed as the guard squinted at the document under a flashlight, muttering in Arabic. Inside the van, Yael, the team's medic impersonator, tightened her grip on a concealed injector holding a fast-acting tranquilizer. The guard finally looked up. "Cholera? Here. That's impossible." Yael forced a tired, irritated sigh, channeling the frustration of an overworked government doctor. "Sir, with respect, the bacteria don't check your schedules." The second guard snorted. "Let them in." The metal gates groaned open. As they rolled into the compound, Eyal caught a glimpse of what lay inside. A maze of corridors. A subterranean hangar. And armed escorts everywhere. But none of that worried him as much as what Yael whispered next, barely audible in the darkness. "Yael, the Falcon is not alone. Someone else is here. Someone important." Eyal's pulse kicked. The mission had just changed. And none of them were ready for the name they would hear inside that fortress. The team moved through the inner corridors with calculated calm. Every step echoed off concrete walls carved deep into the cliff, walls that hid more than just weapons deals. Guards escorted them toward the lower levels where the cholera inspection was supposed to begin. But Yael kept glancing at her covert thermal scanner. "There are 2 high-heat signatures in the negotiation chamber," she whispered. "One is the Falcon. The other, much larger. He's surrounded by his own security." Eyal didn't need a name. Someone with personal guards inside Gaddafi's most secret fortress meant only one thing. A regime insider. A powerful one. At the bottom of the stairwell, 2 guards unlocked a steel door and motioned for the medical team to proceed. As the heavy slab opened, the truth hit them like a shockwave. Inside the chamber, under a flickering overhead light, stood the Falcon, thin, hawk-nosed, clutching a briefcase handcuffed to his wrist. Next to him, a tall man in a gold-trimmed officer's coat. A man whose face appeared on every Libyan parade poster. A man Mossad analysts prayed they would never encounter up close. Colonel Jamal al-Masri, Gaddafi's personal procurement chief. The man who handled every illicit weapons purchase. Eyal's throat tightened. If he recognized the team as outsiders, the mission, and all of them, were finished. The colonel turned, impatient. "You're late. Let's make this quick. The buyer wants the components in Tripoli by morning." Yael stepped forward with perfect confidence. "Before anything is transported, we must clear your men for infection risk." The colonel huffed. "Fine. Do it fast." But Eyal noticed something. The Falcon kept touching his left ear. A nervous tick? No. A microcomms earpiece. And someone on the other end was feeding him information. Yael began examining the first guard, slipping a tranquilizer patch onto the man's neck. He slumped silently against the wall. Eyal moved fast. A distraction. A takedown. A capture. In 3 seconds the room erupted. The Falcon bolted for the door. The colonel reached for a hidden sidearm. Yael knocked him off balance with a medical tray. A flashbang clattered across the floor, Eyal's signal. Boom. White light. Ringing ears. Shouts. The team swept in, subduing the guards with surgical precision. When the haze cleared, the Falcon lay pinned under 2 operatives, the briefcase still chained to his wrist. Eyal crouched beside him. "You're coming with us." Quietly. The Falcon spat. "You have no idea what you just interrupted." But Eyal did. They hadn't just captured a buyer. They had exposed a secret procurement pipeline tied directly to Gaddafi's inner circle. Outside, the fortress alarms began to wail. Heavy boots thundered overhead. They had 6 minutes before the entire compound flooded with soldiers. "Extraction Route C," Eyal ordered. "Now." The team dragged the Falcon through the maintenance tunnels, past boilers, pipelines, and old Italian-era escape shafts crumbling under decades of neglect. Explosions sounded above. They had been discovered. But at the final tunnel exit, the desert night opened before them. When? Stars. Freedom. And far in the distance, a black helicopter rose from behind a dune, an unmarked craft with no insignia, blades chopping through silence. A voice crackled in Eyal's earpiece. Package retrieved? Eyal glanced at the Falcon, trembling, defeated. Package secured. Moments later, they vanished into the night sky, leaving behind a fortress that would spend the next 7 days trying to explain how 6 outsiders walked inside and disappeared with Gaddafi's most protected secret buyer.